What's up, guys? Justin here with the realtimeessentials.com. So one of the most exciting announcements lately from Megascans has been that they're starting to offer trees and foliage. They're actually working on a larger library of very realistic trees. And so they've released the first set of those, and you can download those for free and bring them into Unreal Engine. So in this video, we're going to check those out, take a look, and see what we can do with them. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so just to note, you can get the Megascans Trees. Specifically, this is labeled the European Black Alder from the Epic Games store. So this is currently only available for Unreal Engine. It's not currently available for like Twinmotion or anything like that that I'm aware of. So we're going to look at it inside of Unreal. But you can add those using the Epic Games store. But now, what I want to do is I want to jump over into Unreal Engine. All right, so first off, let's talk about how to access the trees. So the way that's going to work is if you go into your content folder, when you add that to your project from the Epic Games store, it should add a folder labeled Black Alder right here, which you can double click on. And so that's going to contain folders having things like your maps, your materials, or in this case, we want to focus on the geometry folder. And in this case, we want to go with the Pivot Painter folder. So if we open that up, notice how there's a list of trees in here. All right, so if you want to bring these into your scene, all you have to do is just find them in your content folder and just drag them into your scene. Now I will say this does take a while longer than in some of the videos that I've seen because it does bring this in, it brings the mesh in, it compiles all the shaders, other things like that. So you're going to have to do a little bit of waiting while you wait for that to come in. And so one thing I do find really interesting about this is there's two different kinds or versions of most of the trees, or there's at least two different kinds of trees in here. So there's the field version and then there's the forest version. And that's really interesting because they literally are saying that the field version is basically a version of a tree as it would be out in the field, where a forest version is something that would be more having to do with the way that it might look in the forest. And so what's interesting about this is between the forest and the field versions, notice how they're actually going to be slightly different colors. They're going to look a little bit different. And the reason for that is because a forest tree is going to get a different level of light and therefore a different level of nutrition than a field tree. And so it's nice to see a company that's really getting into detail with these trees. But if we zoom in on them, you can see how they have highly detailed textures. They also have movement. So they actually have like wind movement built into them as well. So you can see how these are very detailed trees. They do take a little while to bring in. Some of that may have to do with the way that I'm running. I'm currently running an external installation here, but they are very detailed. All right, so obviously it's very cool, right, that you can bring this in. These meshes are already set up. You've got your textures and other things like that. The cool thing about these Megascans assets is there's other things that are built in here too that you can use in order to control things like the movement of the trees, other things like that. So what you want to do is, in addition to having the Black Alder folder, you should also have the Megascans presets folder that gets brought in. Well, if you open that up, there's actually a global Foliage Actor that you can bring in. So basically what this is something you can bring into your scene to affect the way that the wind blows and the trees act. So if you take that actor, you drag it into your scene like this, notice what that does is that gives you control over here on the right hand side of a bunch of different things about the way that the Megascans assets are going to interact in your scene. So for example, notice how I have settings in here for things like wind. Well, if I adjust this, right? Notice how if I take my wind strength from 2, so if I click in here, you can see how my trees are moving just a little bit, but, and notice you have to have this actor selected in order for this to work, but let's say you wanted more wind, you could bump the strength up. So if I bump this up to like 10, notice how these trees are going to move a lot more than they were before. So you can use this to control the way that the trees are moving inside of your scene. So you can adjust the wind strength, you can adjust the wind speed. I wouldn't go too fast on this one. The movement starts getting really weird if you go really high on these, but it gives you the ability to really kind of adjust this. You can also adjust the amount of noise in here, which is going to affect if your trees are going to be more, notice how there's a lot more movement in here than there was previously. So the higher you bump that up, the more individual movement you're going to get across your trees. So if we bring that back down to 10, you can see how we get this more like slow moving wind animation. All right, so not only can you control the wind, you can also control other things in here as well. So for example, notice how there's a season and health function. Well, what that's going to do is that's going to allow you to affect if these trees are green or if they're more like a different season. So let's say, for example, that I put in a value of 150 in here, so a higher value. Well, if you look at this, these now show more of an autumn than they did, or a fall, as opposed to showing like the green summer. So that means you can use this in order to affect the seasons as well. You can also adjust that brightness. So from 0 to, I would assume it goes from 0 to 1. Like this, but notice how if I put a value of 1 in here, the yellow color is brighter. So you can adjust your season strength in here to adjust the way that your trees are going to look. You can also adjust the health of your trees as well. So notice how if I drag this to the left, these trees are looking older and a little bit more kind of like they're dying. So it's not necessarily the bright orange of the fall as much as it is that kind of like brown color when trees aren't really getting the nutrients to the leaves anymore. So you can use this to really affect the way these look, and this can really affect the feel of your scenes. So note that you can go into the individual textures and make some adjustments to really kind of customize these. I don't really want to get too far into that in this video, but you can adjust things like the seasons, the way that those are going to look, the brightness of the colors, other things like that. So you can definitely do that. I don't really want to get way down that rabbit hole right now, but there are some things you can adjust just by going in and adjusting these materials. So I will link to a video down below on the Quixel website that talks about that more in depth. So if you do want to do some more like custom material editing and that kind of thing, you can get more information on that from there. So note that you can also paint these using the foliage painting tool. So if we go to window, if we go to modes, foliage, like this, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've dragged the trees that you want to paint into the foliage painter. So you can drag those in from the recently placed over here into the foliage painter. But then if we were to select them, right, so I'm going to do a shift click, and I've already kind of set my densities in here. So I've got them at like 0.25, something like that. And then I adjusted my size over here. But now if I click in here, notice how this is going to paint those different trees that I have selected in here. And so there are some things you can do with the variation, which I'm not going to get super far into right now, but just know that you can use this in order to quickly place these trees inside of your scenes. And so one other thing to note is theoretically you can use the global foliage actor to add overall variation to your trees in here. I haven't quite gotten that one working yet, but the functionality is in here. I'm pretty sure I'm just missing a setting, but just note that this is set up to do that, so these trees wouldn't all be uniform in color. And then the other thing you should take a look at is notice how these are also set up with LODs. So notice how when I zoom out, this is automatically loading in LODs and also kind of culling out some of the trees that are in here. So as I'm further away, notice how we've got those really like low poly trees in the background. But notice how as I zoom in, we're starting to get the tree geometry in here, and it's actually like reacting to the light and other things like that. So the closer I get, the higher level of detail is getting loaded in here. This is really set up for performance as well as, so it's not just set up for detail, it's also set up for performance. And so if you double click on one of the trees, you can actually bring up a window and take a look at the LODs that are in here. So this tree, for example, if you look at the LOD options, you can see how there's an LOD 0 all the way down to an LOD 6, right? And what it's doing is it's dynamically loading those in based on the distance from the camera. So you can actually preview those over here, just like this. So notice how the higher the LOD, the more detail is being shown. And the more work your computer is going to have to do to display it, but the more realistic it's going to be. So if you use Unreal Engine at all, I highly recommend you go download these trees and try them out. I don't know why you wouldn't, as they're 100% free, but I think these are more an indication of where we're going with Unreal Engine and Quixel in the future. So I'm super excited to see more plants and trees, as well as hopefully more architectural style furniture and things like that in the future. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think about this development? Have you tried these out? I just love having that conversation with you guys. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.